I pried open an ice house door in a storm. A widow said, "My son-in-law already sold this place once." Emery Vance had $9, a duffel bag with a set of hand tools he'd carried since his last steady job on a cold storage maintenance crew, and a habit of checking any old ice house he passed for shelter. A habit that had led him, more than once that year, to exactly the kind of forgotten structure that kept him dry for a few weeks at a stretch. He was 22 years old, laid off 8 months earlier when the regional cold storage company that employed him consolidated its remaining facilities, eliminating his entire maintenance position in a single afternoon. He had been moving through farm country ever since, taking whatever short-term work he could find. The consolidation notice had cited operational streamlining as its justification, language Emery had come to recognize across 8 months of towns exactly like this one, as the specific corporate dialect for deciding that a technician's actual familiarity with the facility's specific works mattered less than whatever a centralized operation could theoretically manage instead. He had grown up around cold storage and ice house infrastructure his whole life, his own father having maintained exactly this kind of equipment for nearly 3 decades before him, and he had learned, riding along on service calls from an early age, the particular patience such maintenance required, understanding that a structure built to hold cold against a summer's heat demanded a different kind of careful attention than most other outbuildings ever needed. The storm arrived without much warning that particular evening, lightning splitting the sky considerably closer than Emery found comfortable, and he made for the nearest structure he could see, a squat wooden ice house, standing beside an otherwise abandoned-looking farmhouse, its door swollen shut with age and weather. He worked a pry bar from his own kit against the door's warped frame, forcing it open with considerable effort, just as the rain began falling in earnest sheets, thunder cracking directly overhead in a way that made him flinch despite himself. He had barely stepped inside when a lantern's glow revealed a woman already there, startled by his sudden entrance, but recovering quickly enough that Emery understood he'd interrupted someone considerably more accustomed to unwelcome surprises than the moment might otherwise have suggested. She'd clearly been sitting there some time already, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders against the ice house's naturally cool interior, her posture the particular tension of someone actively hiding rather than simply sheltering from weather. "You've picked a strange building to break into," the woman said, her voice steady despite the evident tension in her posture. "Though I suppose a storm forgives most trespasses that wouldn't otherwise be forgiven." "I'm sorry," Emery said. "I saw the storm coming and needed shelter. I didn't realize anyone was using this place." "I'm not using it exactly," the woman said. "I'm hiding in it, which is a considerably different thing. Name's Agnes Fairweather. This farm's been mine since my husband passed 3 years ago, though you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise, given how persistently my own son-in-law keeps trying to convince buyers otherwise." "What do you mean, convince buyers?" Emery asked. "My son-in-law already sold this place once," Agnes said. 8 months ago. Forged my signature on a deed, arranged a private sale to a developer looking to build vacation properties along this creek, and very nearly succeeded before the county clerk noticed the signature didn't match anything else on file for me. The sale was voided, but Desmond's never accepted that outcome. He's brought a new buyer back tonight, in the middle of this very storm, apparently believing bad weather might make me more inclined to simply sign something rather than argue. "Is he here now?" Emery asked, keeping his own voice low despite the storm's noise outside. "At the farmhouse, likely wondering where I've gotten to," Agnes said. "I saw his car coming up the drive an hour ago and slipped out here rather than face him alone in the dark. I know that's not much of a plan, but it was the only one I had time to manage." Over the following hour, sheltering together against the storm's worst fury, Agnes told Emery in careful, measured pieces the fuller history of what had brought her son-in-law to her door on exactly this kind of stormy night. Her daughter Rosalind had married Desmond Halloway 12 years earlier, a union that had, by Agnes's own careful account, grown increasingly strained in recent years over what Agnes suspected were Desmond's own mounting debts that had apparently made this creek front property, inherited jointly by Rosalind upon her father's death, an increasingly tempting target for a man looking for a quick source of cash, regardless of whose signature the sale actually required. "I liked Desmond well enough the first several years," Agnes admitted. Charming, ambitious, seemed genuinely devoted to Rosalind. "I don't know exactly when the debt started or what exactly he's been spending on that's left him this desperate. I only know the man who forged my signature 8 months ago felt like a stranger wearing a familiar face. Nothing at all like the son-in-law I once trusted without a second thought." "Rosalind doesn't know the full extent of what Desmond's attempted," Agnes said. "I haven't had the heart to tell her, and I don't know that she'd fully believe me if I did. She's always seen the best in him, longer than most people manage with considerably less reason to." "How did you first discover the forgery?" Emery asked. "A neighbor mentioned surveyors walking the property line, months before I'd heard anything about a sale," Agnes said. "I called the county clerk myself, confused, and that's when I learned a deed transfer was already in process. My own signature apparently attached to paperwork I'd never seen, let alone signed. I don't think I've fully recovered from that particular phone call, even 8 months later." "Do you have documentation of the first fraudulent sale being voided?" Emery asked. "Something that would prove this pattern clearly, if he's genuinely attempting it again tonight?" "The county sent formal notice when they voided it," Agnes said. "I kept the letter, though I couldn't tell you exactly where in the farmhouse it's currently filed. I haven't needed to produce it since, until apparently tonight." Emery spent the following 20 minutes helping Agnes think through exactly how to approach the confrontation waiting inside, understanding that she needed more than simple resolve to face a man who had already demonstrated a willingness to forge her own signature once already. "I think you need that letter in hand before you speak with him at all," Emery said. "Documented proof of the first attempt considerably strengthens your position, particularly if his new buyer doesn't yet know about that history." "The buyer's likely still inside, waiting with Desmond," Agnes said. "I don't relish the idea of walking back in there without knowing exactly what I'm facing." "Then let's find the letter first," Emery said. "I'll come with you, if you'd like the company. I don't intend to let you face this alone, storm or not." "Why would a stranger take on somebody else's fight on a night this bad?" Agnes asked, studying him a long moment through the lantern light. "I don't know that it's entirely a stranger's fight once I've heard the full story," Emery said. "I think most people would find it hard to walk back out into that storm and simply leave you to face this alone, whatever the actual answer to your question turns out to be." He hesitated a moment before continuing. "I lost my own position 8 months ago to a decision made entirely without my input, by people who never once considered what it would actually cost me. I don't think I could walk away from watching that same kind of powerlessness happen to somebody else. Not tonight." They made their way back to the farmhouse through the storm's continuing fury, and Agnes led Emery directly to a small filing cabinet in her late husband's old study, working through drawers with hands made clumsy by both cold and nerves, until she finally produced the county's formal voiding notice, its official seal confirming exactly what she'd described. The study itself felt, to Emery, like stepping into a portrait of the marriage Agnes had described only in fragments so far. Her late husband's own careful organization, visible in every labeled folder, despite 3 years of disuse since his passing. Voices carried from the farmhouse's front room. Desmond's tone, considerably more confident than Agnes's own account, had prepared Emery to expect, discussing terms with someone whose voice Emery didn't recognize. "That's the buyer," Agnes whispered. "A man named Grant Ashford. Desmond's mentioned him before, some property developer from the city looking to expand into this county." Agnes entered the front room with the letter in hand, Emery standing a respectful step behind her, and Desmond's confident expression faltered immediately at the sight of his mother-in-law's steady composure. The front room itself, warm and well lit against the storm outside, held an incongruous domesticity that struck Emery as almost obscene given the fraud actively unfolding within it. "Agnes," Desmond said, recovering his own composure with visible effort, "I didn't realize you'd be joining us tonight. Mr. Ashford and I were simply discussing the property's potential, purely hypothetically at this stage. I don't believe anything about tonight is hypothetical, Desmond," Agnes said, holding up the county's letter. "I have documentation here confirming the county voided your last attempt to sell this property using a forged deed. I think Mr. Ashford deserves to understand exactly what kind of arrangement he's actually being offered before this conversation proceeds any further." Grant Ashford's own expression shifted rapidly from polite interest to genuine alarm, taking the letter from Agnes's hands and reading it carefully, his eyes moving faster with each line as the full implication settled in. "This says, 'forged signature,'" he said, looking up at Desmond with an expression considerably less friendly than the one he'd apparently worn moments earlier. "You told me this property was yours to sell, free and clear, through your wife's inheritance." "It's complicated," Desmond began, but Ashford was already gathering his own coat, his interest in the property evaporating entirely in the face of documented fraud. "It's not complicated at all," Ashford said. "I don't do business with men who forge deeds, Mr. Halloway. I'll be seeing myself out, and I'd strongly suggest you consider your own legal exposure before attempting anything like this again with anyone else." He paused at the door, glancing back at Agnes with something approaching genuine apology. "I'm sorry for whatever role I've unknowingly played in this, ma'am. I had no idea." "You couldn't have known," Agnes said. "I don't hold you responsible for trusting a man who's evidently made a habit of deceiving people considerably closer to him than a stranger negotiating a business deal." Once Ashford's car had disappeared down the storm-lashed drive, Agnes turned to face her son-in-law directly, her voice carrying a steadiness Emery suspected had taken considerable effort to summon. "I don't intend to press criminal charges tonight, Desmond, though I have every right to," Agnes said. "I intend, instead, to tell Rosalind everything tomorrow morning and let her decide for herself what kind of marriage she actually wants to continue building with a man who forges her own mother's signature rather than simply asking for help with whatever debts have driven him to this." "Agnes, please," Desmond said, his own composure fully cracking now. "I never meant for it to go this far. The debts got away from me, and this seemed like the only way out that didn't involve admitting how badly I'd managed things." "You had considerably more honest options than forging my signature, Desmond," Agnes said. "I might have even helped you if you'd simply asked instead of deciding on my behalf that I wasn't worth trusting with the truth." "I was ashamed," Desmond said. "I didn't want you or Rosalind to know how badly I'd let things slip. I thought I could fix it quietly, sell the property, pay off what I owed, and nobody would ever need to know how close I'd come to losing everything on my own foolish decisions. Instead, you very nearly cost me everything, twice, to protect a pride that was never actually worth protecting at that particular cost," Agnes said. "I don't think you fully understood either time that the thing you were risking wasn't simply a piece of land. It was every bit of trust this family had ever placed in you." Desmond's own composure finally broke entirely, and he left without further argument, the particular defeated retreat of a man who understood, at last, that his second attempt had failed as thoroughly as his first. Agnes did speak with Rosalind the following morning, a conversation Emery understood, from the exhausted but resolute set of Agnes's shoulders when she returned that afternoon, had been considerably more difficult than the storm's confrontation itself. Rosalind separated from Desmond within the month, once the full pattern of his deception became undeniable. Even to a wife who had spent years choosing to believe otherwise. She didn't want to believe it at first, Agnes told Emery some days later. I don't think any daughter wants to hear that plainly about her own husband. But I showed her the letter, and eventually she asked Desmond directly, and he didn't deny it. I think that was the moment she finally understood she'd been protecting an illusion rather than a marriage. How is she managing now? Emery asked. Better than I expected, honestly, Agnes said. Angry mostly, which I think is considerably healthier than the years of quiet doubt she'd apparently been managing before any of this came fully into the light. She's staying with me for a while, sorting out what comes next. I find I don't mind the company nearly as much as I expected to, given the circumstances that brought her back. Agnes paused, a faint, weary smile crossing her face. It's strange, having my own daughter back under this roof after so many years apart, even under circumstances I'd never have wished for either of us. Emery stayed on at the farm through that winter, and the ones that followed, formally hired by Agnes to help manage the property properly, a position that gave him steady work and the particular satisfaction of having arrived entirely by accident on the one stormy night a widow most needed someone standing beside her, rather than facing a fraud alone. He spent that first year restoring the ice house itself, understanding it had earned a particular sentimental place in both their memories, and repaired the farmhouse's own aging systems that Agnes had let slide during the exhausting months of legal uncertainty following the first fraud attempt. Rosalind, staying on through that same period, took to helping with the farm's smaller daily tasks, the three of them settling into an unexpected but genuinely comfortable rhythm that none of them had anticipated the night of that first storm. My husband would have been glad to know somebody finally stood with me against that particular storm, Agnes told Emery, one evening the following spring, the two of them sitting together on the farmhouse porch watching clear skies for once. He always said family was supposed to protect what mattered most, not exploit it the moment grief made protection harder to manage alone. I think he'd have been glad about more than just that one night, Emery said. I think he'd have been glad you didn't have to face the months of uncertainty afterward entirely alone either. Emery wrote to his own mother that spring, describing the ice house and the storm and the whole strange sequence of events that had led a routine search for shelter to become, in the end, exactly the kind of steady purpose he'd feared he might never find again after the consolidation ended his own cold storage career. Her reply came a few weeks later, brief but warm in the particular way Emery remembered growing up with. Your grandfather always said the right kind of stranger shows up exactly when a person stopped expecting anyone to. Sounds like you found your way into exactly that kind of story, on exactly the right stormy night. Emery thought some evenings that first spring about the 8 months of towns and consolidation notices that had led him to a swollen ice house door on a stormy evening, and understood, watching Agnes and Rosalind move through the farmhouse together with a security neither had known in the months since the first fraud attempt, that he had found, at the end of that unsettled stretch, exactly the kind of purpose his own grandfather had modeled decades before he was old enough to understand it. Not simply steady work, but the particular privilege of arriving, entirely by chance, on the one stormy night, a family's whole trust in itself, very nearly finished unraveling for good. So here's the question worth sitting with tonight. How many family betrayals hide behind the assumption that grief and isolation will keep a widow too overwhelmed to notice a second attempt at exactly the fraud that failed the first time? And what does it take? a storm forcing a stranger's door open, a filed letter finally found in time, a buyer willing to walk away once he understood the truth. For a second fraudulent sale to fail as thoroughly as the first. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to Ember and Rail, because there's always room by the fire for one more, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight.